Hi, friends. Welcome to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and joining me as my co host for this season is Reverend Kathi McShane. Hi, Kathi.
Hi, Lisa. It's good to be with you.
Friends, you've heard Kathi on several of our podcast episodes. She's on our staff as the Director of Learning and Innovation, and her book is Picking Up the Pieces Leadership After Empire. And if you haven't read it, put it on your list. I highly recommend it. Kathi, thank you for co hosting with us this season. I have to say that you always help me look at things just a little differently so that I see new insights. So I'm really grateful that you are doing this with us this season.
Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me. It's been so fun to do this with you.
Great. Okay, so speaking of our season, this is truly a dynamic series of conversations. We can't wait to share them with you. So let me set them up in this way. So for those of you who are for those of you who do crossword puzzles, here's a clue. See if you can get this. It's a 5-letter word for around the corner, and it starts with a C. You got it? Close. So this was a real crossword answer, by the way, not making this up. It's around the corner, close. So we are often asked what we are seeing right around the corner from where the church is today. What is around the corner that we need to be watching for? So, around the corner is not as far as we might think. It's actually very close. And even more, there are clear signals that we can see right now that are right here. The Spirit is up to something. And the invitation really is to get close to what is happening right now, to pay attention, to notice, and to wonder, where is the energy? Where is the joy? What is God up to right now? And that will actually give us a picture of what is around the corner. So, we've been asking these questions, observing and listening. We've been inviting conversation and engaging with leaders from across the spiritual landscape in gatherings large and small. And there are 5 themes that are close at hand today and showing us what's around the corner for the church. At least 5 themes that we've begun to notice and pay attention to. So, before I share the first theme that we're going to explore in today's conversation, I want to remind you, listeners, that we love hearing from you. Send us an email. Let us know what these conversations are sparking in you and maybe in your own leadership teams. What are you seeing and paying attention to in your context? Okay, so for today's topic, really, theme that is emerging, it's hospitality. There is something about the way we show up together that helps to form us as the people of God. It matters, and it's very biblical. So, Kathi, I'm so curious for you to comment on this because you talk about Mosaic leadership in your book. And I'd love for you to talk about how you see hospitality as part of your vision for Mosaic leadership. And you might start with what Mosaic leadership is and then dig into the hospitality piece.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Mosaic leadership, that phrase that we use in the book it's really a little bit of a play on words. We think about it both meaning in the tradition of Moses
Hmm.
and mosaic in the kind of artwork that comes from putting together
Mm.
into something beautiful the broken pieces of something. And we use that image because we talk a lot about how we learn to be the kind of leaders who are formed by by the things that break along the way, including our
Mm.
own images of
Hmm.
ourselves, our as leaders, as people with sort of invincible strength and vision and purpose. That in fact, it's our stumblings and falls along the way that turn us into the kind of leaders who know that sharing power and making space for everyone around us to flourish and to offer their own contributions to power and to vision and to leadership is exactly what faith-filled leadership
Hmm.
um, look like. And so it's so funny, Lisa, we never used the word hospitality in the book,
Uh-huh.
but in this context, I see that's exactly what
Yeah.
this kind of shared leadership is about. That sort of open-handed leadership that makes space for others to come alongside rather than to live under a leader's work and responsibility.
Right. Nice, nice. We get to see that today with our guests who help us dig more deeply into this theme of hospitality. So, Reverend Alicia Forde and Tamice Spencer-Helms are our guests today. And Kathi, would you share their brief bios?
Yes, I'm happy to. Alicia Forde has been co facilitating with me our Women with an Entrepreneurial Spirit cohort for the last year. And she's just now the newest member of our Learning and Innovation team at Wesleyan Impact Partners. I'm so happy to have her as part of this team in this fall. And so I'm sure this will not be her only podcast appearance. I
Right.
expect we'll see her in a lot of conversations. Alicia is a pastor, a poet, an organizer. She lives in Boulder, Colorado, and attends an Episcopal church there. And most recently, she's served as the international office director for the UUA. Tamice Spencer-Helms is a published author, a speaker, and a theologian, and she's based in Richmond, Virginia. She spent 16 years in full-time ministry, and then she founded something called Subculture Incorporated, which is a nonprofit that provides sort of holistic support and crisis relief for Black college students. She has a book. She's written a book that was released in 2023 called Faith Unleavened: The Wilderness Between Trayvon Martin and George Floyd. And she's a real bright light for us, I think, in the landscape of people coming up into leadership in this entrepreneurial area.
Yeah. Alicia and Tamice are beautiful, strong leaders. And I'm excited for y'all to hear this conversation. Kathi, what stood out for you?
You know, this was an amazing conversation to witness. It felt to me like sort of the soul of hospitality that
Mm,
was sort of revealing itself in front of us in this conversation between Alicia and Tamice. They'd never met one another before. And yet we saw a sort of open hearted way that they approached one another. And you could almost watch and hear how each of them was making space for the other, not only in the conversation, but internally
yeah.
um,
Yes.
the more they talked. It was a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah. You're so right. There were times at which they were visibly and in the moment learning from each other and listening so intently that you could tell that was shaping their own thinking. It was beautiful. It really was. You're right. It was this embodiment of the hospitality that we were interrogating, if you will, that we were trying to understand better. And one of the things that struck me was um, how they talked a lot about intentionality, like proactive, carving space and time, being intentional about the work. And right alongside that, they talked about a letting go, about when you create space, you allow for folks to show up as they are. In other words, you are not controlling what happens. There is uh, a letting go and letting the spirit move and letting people find their place and show up as they are. And so to have both intentionality and letting go was just a lovely juxtaposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's hear our conversation with Alicia and Tamice. This is so exciting to have you two with us. Hi, Alicia.
Hi, Lisa. I'm so grateful to be here with you, Kathi, and to see you again, Tamice. What a delight.
It's good to be here. I'm so excited to be here.
Tamice, we're so glad you're with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, this is going to be fun. Our theme today is hospitality, and particularly how hospitality is showing up in the kind of emerging spiritual landscape today as folks are seeking meaning and purpose and belonging, that hospitality seems to be a really important, let me say that differently. Hospitality plays a really important role. And so we're going to dig into that today. And I want to start by thinking about and peeling back the layers of what we mean by hospitality. So let's start with an idea and a quote from Mirabai Starr, who, in her teaching at the Center for Action and Contemplation's Living School, says that our task is to mend the broken world. And she says we do that through two means. The first is chesed, or loving kindness, and the second is tzedakah, which is that hospitality, generosity. She says it's sometimes translated as charity, and it's an offering of ourselves, even when it's not convenient and not comfortable. So I'm curious about how you react to her placement of hospitality in this idea of mending the world and how you defined hospitality. So let's jump in with that.
I've been thinking a lot about hospitality lately, actually, because I've been thinking a lot about heaven. And to me, it seems like the elements that stick out to me about heaven also stick out to me when I feel I'm being hosted well. So there's an element of aesthetic where it's just beautiful and restful, but then there's also an ability to be vulnerable and not have to worry about whether limitation or flaws are going to get in the way of my belonging in this space. I feel like the most hospitable spaces, yeah, they consist of loving kindness, but also just an invitation for my authentic self. So I think about authenticity and aesthetic when I think about hospitality a lot.
Thank you for that, Tamice. So much of it resonates with me, right? How can I find a sense of belonging in a space? Uh, Sarah Ahmed, who is a feminist philosopher, talks about um, the way in which a space, the comfort of a space, holds the body like a comfortable sofa. And so a lot of that resonates when I hear you speak. And, it's beautiful, restful. It has room for vulnerability and intimacy. But when you asked the question, Lisa, this piece by Rumi came to mind, and I just could not get it out of my head. So if it's okay, I'm going to share it. And it's Rumi's The Guest House. And this is a Coleman Barks translation from 97. And in it, he says, "This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." Sort of thought about in that piece, in that poem, I thought about what does it mean to be hospitable to the self?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, what does it mean to be to practice hospitality when it's uncomfortable? I don't actually want to invite in a meanness. In fact, when I'm thinking about the self, I want to push those things away. I don't think they have anything to teach me.
Mm-hmm.
But for both the self and community, they matter. And how do we create space, hospitable space for them to exist and to encounter a kind of of love, which I'll say more about later because my thoughts got to, oh, but can you have hospitality without love? And then, well, what does love mean? And so I'm
Mm.
getting far afield, but that poem by Rumi and that translation by Coleman Barks just for me encapsulated some thoughts about hospitality.
One of the things I love about that quote you just read, Alicia, is the power of it, right? That it's not hospitality as a passive or simply receptive thing. There is power in welcoming these otherwise unwelcome guests. And it seems to me if Mirabai Starr's right, and I think she is about the work, our work is about mending the world. It has to be a powerful tool to do that. That's
Mhm.
mending the world is no small work.
Mhm. Mhm.
So how does hospitality sort of is it a big enough word to hold, or a big enough thought to hold what is needed for that task?
Mm. That's a great question. Is hospitality big enough to hold? I'm wondering about you're mentioning power, and the images that I'm getting, especially when I think about Rumi, is like a proactive kindness. So to me, hospitality, I think about, so it's what's funny is growing up before I got into theology and ministry, I wanted to major in hospitality because I just noticed that I guess you're right, there was a power in creating and carving out spaces where people were able to rest. And I think about like the hospitality industry, I think about the food industry, and even, and that, people come to these establishments with an amount of vulnerability already because they're coming to rest, they're coming to enjoy a meal. And so to me, I think there was something really powerful about crafting and curating a space, and being entrusted with a space that would enable someone to rest or enjoy their family or mourn the loss of a loved one or celebrate some sort of milestone. And now I think about that theologically, and I think it can still be true, right? Curating spaces where people are free to really enter into very vulnerable moments and experiences, or at least process them. And I think about that theologically now in terms of like, well, how do I create theological hospitality, in terms of, I think that that's why I do theoactivism, because it's proactive to me, and it's a sense in which you're proactively being kind, you're proactively carving out space, and you have enough kind of like the sons of Issachar, right? You know the times and the seasons enough to know that this is the type of space a person might need, especially in times like these. And so, what does hospitality in these spaces sort of look like? And that's been a fun thing to kind of to think about. And I do agree with this Rumi piece of, I just played that poem in a training the other day because I love it. And it was a Helena Bonham Carter read it, and it's phenomenal.
Mm.
You have to find it on YouTube. But it is true to like kind of be hospitable with even your internal guests. and I don't know the answer to this, but I am thinking about, wow, I hadn't thought about being proactive internally about my own internal hospitality to my flaws and these sort of guests and these meanness and these things that show up in me sometimes. And so yeah, I think it's kind of coalescing right now, in real time for me, the connections between these two things. And I think it's really fascinating right now. Yeah.
Well, and the richness with which you all are describing the depth and power of hospitality, I think brings to mind that maybe it's the limitations we put on ourselves or on the
Mm,
word. Have we made the word too small for
right.
the depth of what we mean by it and what is meant by it biblically and
Mm,
scripturally? And so I think about congregations who will often describe themselves as friendly. I mean, so in other words, they embrace a kind of we're hospitable, but are they living into the power and the depth of
mm,
it? Especially that last piece in
mm,
Mirabai Starr's quote where she says, even when it's not convenient and it's not comfortable. And
mhm,
and so I wonder, have you observed, or what have you observed about the limits of congregational hospitality?
Ooh.
I mean, that's a good question, Lisa, that I don't know if I'm going to answer.
Fair.
I'll let me answer it in a roundabout way, and you can do some magic in the editing room. I went to church yesterday. I started going to this Episcopal church, and the gospel text was Mark 5:23-43. It's not a text I think about a lot, or maybe ever, but it's the story of the hemorrhaging woman, the woman who for a number of years has had an endless period. And that story is sandwiched in between Jesus on his way to heal Jairus's daughter. And maybe I was listening with new ears, but it was, for me, a revelation, right? And Pastor Janine kind of drew our attention to what all the pieces that were happening. So Jesus is on his way to heal this important rabbi's daughter. And in the middle of that story, this woman who would have been understood as untouchable, unclean, on the margin, touches his robe and is healed. And feeling that healing power leave him, he says, who touches me? And he addresses her by calling her daughter. And Pastor Janine says, daughter in that context would have meant beloved, right? So this person on the margins, here he is on the way to one of the most important people's house. And he stops and he says, daughter, which is beloved, you have been made whole. He takes a moment. He pauses. And then he goes on his way. And for me, that is the call of our faith communities. It's not just about the most powerful or the most important. It's about everyone. And pausing to be attentive to the everyone all the time. Everyone is worthy in every moment. So that's kind of what I walked away with, right? And Howard Thurman talks about this in an essay he has on reconciliation, is the call for us to be open to love in each other and to allow love to flow from ourselves to another and from another to ourselves. That's how that moment, that moment reminds me of what it is we need to be about as communities of faith. Where we've fallen short, I think, is getting caught up in sort of the politics and the culture of our day, in which an other is defined and is labeled as unworthy. And we buy that as true. And I think there's a need to kind of, my church is confessional, and there's a need to confess that we have fallen short and come at it again.
And you're retelling that story, Alicia, it strikes me that Jesus was moved off his mission in stopping to deal with that woman, right? There was something he was trying to accomplish by going to Jairus's house to heal his daughter. And he was willing to pause and for at least some time direct his attention elsewhere. And it strikes me that was it was taking a risk, right, to move off our missions. When I think about our congregations, back to Lisa's question, I think, how are we willing to be moved off of our agendas and even our mission for the sake of radical hospitality. It makes me wonder what would risk-taking hospitality look like?
Mm.
And what would accepting that as the mission look like?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that's what I'm thinking about, and I know that I'm getting to know everyone, but I love alliteration because I'm neurodivergent, and so in addition to authenticity and aesthetic, I hear attunement and attention, right? And so I think, you know, to your point, like if churches were to think about radical hospitality, could we frame them around those types of pillars, right? So that it's not lopsided. We can't just go to a beautiful church, but not everyone is welcome, right? We can't just come into church and be authentic, but no one is caring about the look and the feel. We can't go to a beautiful church that is cool and we all feel like we belong, but the least among us are not receiving attention, or and the leadership is not attuned, right, to the needs. Because what I'm seeing about Jesus and what the disciples say in the story is, there's tons of people touching you, Jesus. So he's clearly talking about a different kind of energy exchange that's taking place, and that to me speaks of the attunement piece, the ability of leadership to be aware and attuned to the needs. And I mean, I think about it again. I mean, I again, because my framework for hospitality started in a secular sort of mindset, and even thinking about all inclusive, the attention, right, and the attunement is what we pay extra for, because I don't want to have to call. I want you to bring it to me. Now, I'm not saying that churches and, you know, congregations need to be, you know, maitre d's or anything like that, but what would it look like to have that level of intentionality about being aware and attuned to the people who are crawling to be touched and to be healed, those that we can't see and those that we kind of miss, like, you know, I think about radical hospitality in that way. If churches framed around hospitality, what could that look like? You know, we're not asking you to change what you say about Jesus. We're asking you to change how you approach hospitality and see what that does for the nuns and the exiles who I think are finding aesthetic spaces where they can be authentic and where their needs are taken care of, right? And seen and heard. They're either carving them out for themselves or they're finding them in non-conventional spaces. So I think there's really kind of an opportunity here, thinking I'm still thinking about Kendra Creasy's Dean's message about what we do with the shipwrecked pieces, right? And how do we create hospitality and build new spaces that are kind of committed to that. I think there's a really great book by Joshua Jipp, and it's called Saved by Faith and Hospitality, and it's a really powerful to look at through the Old Testament, that a large part of the faith or the saving faith of the Hebrews was their attunement to hospitality and how hospitable they were with the people that came from other countries, or, you know, foreigners, and you know, people from outside of their community. And I love that idea. I love the idea of, okay, let's have our doctrines and our beliefs. We have those. But what if we all started to do some more work and look at these pillars of hospitality and think about, where are we lacking? Where could we move forward? Like, how can we work with what we have to kind of shore up the hospitality that's taking place, and being proactive about it, I think is, to me, that's key,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
that's key.
I
Yeah.
love your reminder of attunement, Tamice, and I want to tie that to um, hospitality and risk, right? Because and back to
Yes.
Lisa's question about what are we not doing? Right? A
Mm,
congregation is more than just a building, right?
indeed.
It's more than just
Yes.
those four walls. And so,
Yes.
how if you're place based, doing place based ministry, how are you attuned to the needs of those around you? And how do
Indeed.
you understand membership as bigger than just who walks through the doors on
Oh
Sunday
my goodness.
morning,
Yes.
and that it becomes about being attuned to the world outside your doors,
Mm-hmm.
and how you're in relationship with and solidarity with those
Yes.
folks as well, because they too are part of God's kingdom, and they
Yes.
too are part of, you know, the community that you serve. And so
Mm-hmm.
it takes a kind of I think missional clarity to understand that your world is
Mm-hmm.
bigger than this beautiful space that you inhabit,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Mm-hmm.
flows out, and that the call is to really be in relationship with um, the most marginal,
Yes,
vulnerable,
indeed.
who
Yes,
exist
indeed.
right outside the door. I had this moment on Sunday that I'm not proud of. I never carry cash. And I walked out of church and I was like, still like, oh my God, that sermon was amazing. And communion had real wafers, not that Trader
Mm.
Joe's stuff, which is fine. I just didn't want crackers. I wanted a real wafer. And there was a woman right outside church with her daughter
Mm.
and a sign asking for funds so they could eat.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I paused and I was like digging around in my bag, just like hoping against hope that there was something in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only now that I'm talking to you, it occurs to me that church has, which I never go to, so it didn't occur to me in the moment, they have a coffee hour after the service.
Mm.
There could have been a place of welcome. There could have been hospitality.
Yeah, wow.
If I had slowed down just long enough, right? I was so focused on I don't have any money. Let me see if I can find some. I never paused to say, what is it you need in this moment?
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And how can I help you, support you in getting that? In this congregation that is uber wealthy.
Yeah.
And, I left feeling like deeply ashamed, but what does my shame do? Absolutely nothing.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. It's really good.
Yeah, that's a powerful picture, Alicia, and thank you for being so vulnerable in that. I mean, we've all had those moments, and
Mm-hmm.
you're giving it as this example of how to move beyond a mindset of one way of thinking about how to care for another human and what it means to think in terms of hospitality in the deepest, richest sense, and which is much more integrated into the life of welcoming and into the life of the church. I want to bring a quote in here that I'm reminded of as you all have been talking about this sort of proactive and leaning into the the kind of inclusive welcoming and what that means. And so Carol Dempsey says, when we embrace creation, the poor, our enemies, strangers, foreigners, outcasts, and others, we desire justice for them. We welcome without judging. We love our neighbors as ourselves. We reflect the justice, love, and hospitality of God. This hospitality leads us to desire and work for the flourishing well-being and good of others. So I'm thinking about I mean, that sounds like what you all are talking about, but I love that she's bringing in the hospitality of God. Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Now we're raising this hospitality word to beyond, how welcoming is our space, right? but what does it mean to align ourselves with the hospitality of God? And I'm curious what that brings to mind for you, how you make those connections, the flourishing of others and the hospitality of God.
Man, I love that, Lisa, because I had gotten to this point over the week, and I was like, well, I don't know if you can talk about hospitality without talking about love. And I don't know if you can talk about love without talking about justice. I don't know if you can talk about justice without talking about liberation and the flourishing for all. So when Kathi said, is the word big enough? I was like, well, yes, but it depends on who's defining it. So,
Indeed.
I'm going to hear your quote and raise you one by coming back to Carter Hayward, because love could be so fuzzy, right? But I use this Carter Hayward quote again and again and again because I think it captures what I think about love, and it captures what I think about, I think you said hospitality of God. It's love like truth and beauty is concrete. It is not fuzzy. It's not a fuzzy thing. It's not just sweetness. That's not what it is. It really is a very active matter of making a commitment to mutually beneficial relationships and justice in the world, like right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think of when I think of the hospitality of God, is that part of what we're here to do, that's the individual we, but also the communal we, is really to enact the kingdom. That's Ada Maria Isazi Diaz's term, enact the kingdom of God right here, right now. And to do that through a love that is very clear about what it means to eradicate structures of oppression and to bring a liberation and flourishing for all to bear. Like, I feel like that's our work, and our work is God's work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Ashe. I just kind of want to hold that for a second because I felt like that was really powerful what you shared. And I've been thinking about this for a few years now, and it makes me think about Genesis 3 and 4, and I'm doing my best to condense this for doctoral work because it's a big idea, but I honestly think that the hospitality of God, or the garden, was a place where perfection is not a prerequisite for belonging. And although theologically we've made that the case in terms of how we think about relationship with God, that the garden had to be a no judgment zone. And a no judgment zone is just that we attach value to difference. Who told you were naked? Like who attached value to your sense of being? Who told you that was something that should make you hide? And so to me, I think the picture I'm seeing in that garden scene is very much that, like, the love of God is really truly a non-judgmental love. You belong, and that limitation is not going to mitigate belonging. Limitation can just be limitation. It doesn't necessarily have to have value attached to it. And I think that, to me, when we start attaching value to difference or even limitations, then that's where you start having the introduction of shame. And to me, justice needs to speak to shame and it needs to speak to the ways that we've attached value to difference and otherness, or vulnerability even. So I know I'm still trying to, like, kind of comb through these concepts in my head because I'm trying to communicate them, but I feel very deeply that there's a foundational conversation that we need to have about vulnerability and limitation. And what do those mean, and what is God's posture towards that? And there are other living things in this garden, and a lot of times what's happening is, this tree can't speak for itself, so God sets a boundary, and that boundary is violated, and so there are consequences that take place, which is justice, right, for those who cannot speak, right? Lift up your voice for the voiceless. But at the same time, I don't think it was necessarily related to. I think what's happening in the garden could teach us a lot about hospitality and belonging and how we collectively unfold. And I think a lot of it has to do with, like, who told you were naked? Who made this shameful for you? And really, it's just about vulnerability. So again, like, if God is hospitality, then God has to be vulnerable. Like, there's no other way to have belonging without vulnerability. And justice presents itself when someone who is less limited uses their resources to make wrong things kind of right. So, like, I feel like if our hospitality is marked by justice, it should be about, like, what is in the way of belonging and vulnerability, and how do I use how do I use the resources I have to make the wrong thing right, to eradicate shame or inequity or otherness that causes shame. Like, so it's all theoretical, but I do feel like I'm trying to live that out in my everyday practice, that there is no difference between me and you. And actually, that's the lie. And if I really believe that, then I even have to show up to people who would call me their enemy, or that I see as my own enemy and say, there's more to both of us than this. And that proactive kindness is justice, actually. Is kind of how I've been kind of thinking about it and really honestly trying to live these days. I'm not doing it perfectly. But that's what I'm trying to, and I'm trying to believe this and really do it, and I've seen great fruit.
Oh man, I love that. You're reminding me, I'm just going to go back to Carter Hayward. Love is a
Yeah.
conversion to humanity, right? And
Mm,
I fold hospitality in that, right?
yes.
And it
Mm,
is practice, and it is hard, and it also is very worthwhile. So,
hmm
I'm-
Oh, you
yeah.
all were the perfect folks to invite into this conversation. We knew you would be, but you really, I mean, this is the thoughtfulness and the depth, and you are both leaders who create spaces of authenticity, vulnerability, and deep hospitality. So we knew you have that's intentional and it's who you are. And so I'm curious how you would encourage other leaders to cultivate that kind of environment of hospitality,
mm,
generosity of spirit, justice, equity, depth of love that you're describing.
mm.
How do you encourage other leaders to cultivate that kind of environment?
Yeah, I think just really constructing those A words. So like thinking about aesthetics, thinking about authenticity, thinking about attunement and awareness in your space. Um, to me, I think maybe just like on a real practical level, doing focus, like asking some people some questions, like, if
Mhm.
these were the elements or the components of, radical hospitality, if this was the value of our church, where would you measure us in this ways?
Mhm.
In what ways do you feel like we are attuned to the needs of people who may feel voiceless in some ways?
Mhm.
What are the ways in which aesthetically you feel at rest in this space? What could we, maybe having those conversations would be helpful, because I think to me I always zoom out to like something really easy to grasp and then use it as a litmus test. So that would
Mhm.
be my question. I think I try to think about those things, even though I wouldn't have named them before the podcast this way. But those are the things that I try to be thoughtful about when I'm curating spaces for Black students in particular.
I love how other centered that is. You're listening, you're asking
Mm-hmm.
questions, you're paying attention and drawing folks
Mm-hmm.
out. So it's not just what you think, but you're really listening to those who are in or maybe not yet in that
Mm-hmm.
space.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tamice.
Tamice, will you name those A's again?
Yeah, I think authenticity, aesthetic, maybe attunement. I don't know if you all think that's a great word for it, but the sense that Mark 5.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So whether that's awareness, but there needs to be, to me, it felt like a tapping into the spirit enough to where
mm-hmm,
some energy, some different energy is going out of me, because they were right. I mean, there were people it says there were throngs around Jesus, but there was something about this exchange. I don't know what we could use, in terms of a word for that, because I don't want to cheapen that, because it's a very powerful thing that I think the spirit can give us. The attention. I
mm-hmm.
don't know. I don't know, what word would you use, Reverend Alicia? I don't know.
Well, I really liked attunement, actually.
Attunement.
It
Okay.
just felt, in this moment, it feels exactly right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think those words work. I'm sure I wonder about the neighborhood piece, right? Like, how does that play in, and what are the varying degrees we can scale this out towards our
Mm-hmm,
neighborhood, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So I think it could be, you could play with it for
mm-hmm,
sure.
mm-hmm.
It's just helpful for my neurodivergence. I have to use
I
alliteration.
love it. I absolutely love it. And I don't know that I would say anything uh, that's that different from what you captured with those with the A's that I'm calling them in my head. I mean,
Mm,
I think interpersonally, I think about curiosity as
yes.
um, a guiding
Mm-hmm.
principle, as well as the willingness. I mean, it's the same, the willingness to be open.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the willingness to be open is a willingness to be changed by an encounter
Indeed.
with someone. And
Yes.
I don't live in a world in which that is elevated as a good, right?
Mm,
That that willingness to encounter someone else or new information and to shift.
mm,
And so that feels to me like a core practice, um, for myself and an invitation to others.
yes. Hmm.
When I think about this communally, uh, I feel like I don't have any clue what the answer is. That's why I really gravitated to the A's. I've been obsessed with this idea of the contemplative community or contemplative institution. And I wonder if contemplation, that pausing and grounding in that which is greater than you, holds one of the keys to developing um, that hospitality muscle. And my wondering there has to do with just my sense that we've become highly reactive. How do we even begin to get out of that mode? To slow down long enough and remember who we are and whose we are, reground in our values, and then respond from that place, and kind of grow into what Kathi called that, risky mission, right? I don't think we can get there by rushing or by being reactive or being impulsive. I think my hunch is we get there through um, what I call careful contemplative ways of being together. And that just requires a level of moving at a very different pace. So ill-formed thoughts, but that's kind of where the question sent me.
You know,
You know,
oh, sorry.
sorry, Tamice. Do you want to finish that thought?
I just have a follow-up question. I think pace is important. How hospitable can you be if you're moving at a certain pace? I mean, usually in scripture, hospitality is about a setting of a table, it's about a banquet, and it's not a drive-through. I mean, so I do think that there is a very important point there about pace. That I think that if a church is trying or a congregation is trying to move towards hospitality, I think you're absolutely right that the first question is about at what pace are we moving at the moment, and what does slowing down even look like for us when we are a congregation or have a building or something like that. So I'm sorry, Kathi. That
No.
was really, it struck me that that's a question we should ask. It's a very important question. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it strikes me as you say that, Tamice, that I often think that my job as a worship leader or a congregational leader in a Sunday morning setting is about keeping the time, right?
Yeah.
Making sure things happen in a timely way, right? And on schedule and, watching that. And I think there is a tension there,
Hmm.
as there is at this moment, because I feel like we could and probably should keep talking about this for another hour or two. But I'm also watching how much time we've been in conversation, and I want to turn us toward one of the things that happens in these podcasts, which is as we come to the close, we ask. I'm embarrassed to say this out loud after this conversation. We ask some rapid fire questions.
Let's pace ourselves for the rapid fire questions. Here we go.
So,
Oh, man.
so I'll just ask them one at a time and invite each of you to respond quickly. So, first one: in a decade, a hospitable Christian community will look like what? In a decade, a hospitable Christian community will look like
The neighborhood. It'll look like the neighborhood it's in.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. making no real distinction about who's a member and who's not, but really being willing to be in deep solidarity with the world around it,
Yes.
right? If we're talking place-based, and
Hmm.
committed to, like, its mission is a radical hospitality and love.
Okay, here's the second one. The number one thing that prevents true hospitality in community is
Binary induced shame.
oh,
Dude, that's yes, 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 yes. I love it. Um, I'm sorry I'm not doing rapid fire. Like, I'm just
It's all about pace.
oh, I think fear for sure, right? And
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
that deep reluctance to understand others who appear to be different, and but who are
Hmm.
in fact probably wrestling with some of the same life stuff.
Hmm.
And I, to me, said God is, God is also vulnerable. I think that's how you said it. So
Hmm.
just that holding on to that we're all wrestling.
Hmm.
And I think Margaret Wheatley said, "You don't fear people whose stories you know." Um,
Wow.
and so that willingness to encounter the other. Um,
Hmm.
so I would say the unwillingness to encounter the so-called other is what prevents us.
yeah.
Hmm.
Thanks for hanging in there as I got to my thoughts.
And here's the last one of these. If you want to become more hospitable as a congregation, so we're talking about a community here, what's a question that you might start talking about right now?
I have to, the quote just struck me. Whose stories are not at our table? Whose stories are we missing? Because that's what we do when we gather and when we eat meals. We tell stories. Is it the same story around the table? What stories are missing? That's what I would ask.
Ditto.
Thank you.
So, one final question we're asking all our guests. Kenda Creasy Dean says that when she thinks of the future of the church, she doesn't see one big thing coming. Rather, she sees a lot of small boats. And we'll talk about
Mhm.
that more in our episode with Kenda this season. But what I'd love to hear from you all is, what is a small boat that you see that gives us a glimpse of the future church?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, my context is college students. So thinking about how college students create hush harbors in their dorms or apartments. So I don't know if the boat exists, but I know that it does. I'm trying to find it. But these places of I would like to see the hush harbor uh, excavated and then maybe reproduced digitally for students. But they're just spaces of hospitality and authenticity and expression and freedom that I'd love to see. So maybe campuses in a way, college campuses in a way, and the hush harbors that are being created there, I think could be a boat. I'm hoping could be a boat.
I mean, I'm thinking about our Unitarian Universalist world, and our current push to support innovative communities that are focused on ministry with historically marginalized folks. And I mean, for me, I guess that is a small boat, right? The willingness to do the
Mm,
work of God in the margins, or
mhm.
while churches, organized congregations, try to figure out how they meet the future. So that feels like a small boat. Sometimes it feels. I'm going to contradict myself. Sometimes it feels a little slow,
Mm,
and it feels like it holds great hope for, you know, how we do the work of the holy in the world is through these innovative communities. So that's one response. I had another, and the other is, you took us to Galveston, I believe,
Yes.
and I don't know if that was a small boat, right? That felt like a big ship. I don't remember the name of the congregation, but they were doing, I think, really groundbreaking work in their neighborhood and held the model for a congregation that did not, in fact, see a difference between what happens on the inside of the congregation and what happens on the outside, and held both of those things very well. And that was holy work. That, to me, could be a blueprint for the future.
And I love that image because it is a small boat in a way, but it really, it comes across as such. Well, it doesn't just come across, it has an enormous impact. And I think, whether we're talking about campus ministry or house churches or some of these online communities that are small boats, she says with air quotes for our listeners, but they have this impact that is transformative in people's lives and in neighborhoods and communities. Well, I want to say an enormous thank you to both of you for your generosity of spirit, for your thoughtfulness, for the ways you are both presently impacting the church, but also the ways you are envisioning and even shepherding and stewarding the future of the church. Thank you for the gift of who you are and your leadership. Bless you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much
it's an
for
honor
having
to be
us.
here.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And Tamice, I hope this is not the last time.
Me too, because I'm trying to move at a different pace.
So good to be with you both. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Beautiful.